Hello and welcome to the Out of Town podcast. My name is Tova Khan, and today I'm joined by Kala teacher Ellie Sharvit at Kala Ready with Ellie. You may recognize her name from Instagram, and today's episode was inspired by the multitude of anonymous questions she's received via her NGL link, her Not Gonna Lie anonymous link. Needless to say, this is a mature conversation. We cover all things taras mishpacha, intimacy, marriage related, and is not suitable for all audiences. So if you have young listeners around, please use your discretion when listening. I called my Rav and asked my shilas in preparation for the release of this episode. And my guest shares her opinions. They are not a psak halacha. You need to take this information and ask your own Rav. My purpose in sharing this conversation is to help remove shame around these sensitive topics, and also to give you the language to ask the questions you need to get the support you need to. Our mesorah is a Rav. You have a Rav that you ask with your mesorah, your background that aligns with your life. My Rav has been there to support me through every stage of my marriage. And never, not once, has my Rav ever made me feel bad or feel judged for asking questions. That is by definition what your Rav is there for, to support you. I know some people have expressed some reservations about speaking with a male authority figure, a Rav, about these sensitive topics, and yet routinely trust doctors such as male OBGYNs with some of their most sensitive care. You deserve to have a Rav that you trust so implicitly that can guide you through your life, your choices, your context. I hope that you come away feeling more supported, more seen, more educated. Today's episode is sponsored as a sechus for refuah shalema for Chaim Yitzchak ben Chaya Bracha, and for the refuah shalema of Nechama Tema Bas Edel. Okay, let's go there. Hello and welcome to the Out of Town podcast. I'm here with at Kala Ready with Ellie, taking the Instagram world by storm, willing and able to answer some of the hardest questions, all behind anonymity with the NGLs. Do you mind just introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about where you're from, what your halacha is, and how you ended up on Instagram answering everyone's deepest, darkest secrets? Taras mishpacha and intimacy.
So my name's Ellie. I am just a optometrist. I am a mom of 3. I'm a frum woman. I grew up very much in the YU Machmir world. I went to MMY. I went to Stern, where I learned a lot of the Tar Mishpacha laws way before I was engaged, way before I was married, in my courses in Stern College. And I was very interested in the topic because I think it profoundly impacts women. It has a lot of intersection with women's health and women's lives. And I think in general, intimacy is something that I'd always excited or interested me while I was single. It's this unknown concept. And I finally had this course and this avenue to learn from a yotzat halacha who was willing to teach these topics in a Torah way with great detail and great sources and really answer my questions. And so from that point on, I was very interested in the halachot and in the topics. After that, I got married. I had my own college classes, my own experiences with that. And it came about that I had the opportunity to take a college teacher certification course. And when I had the opportunity presented to me, I felt very uncomfortable with it. This isn't really for me. The course was really designed for women who were already teaching kalas. And I was not teaching kalas. I just knew the halacha really well, having learned it in Stern, but I had never taught anybody, and I definitely did not feel qualified. And I reached out to my mentors, who is yotzat halacha, the person who had taught me these things, Nechama Price at Stern, and I asked her about it. And I said, "Is it crazy? I've only been married 3 years to become a college teacher."
We're married
and she
3
said, "No."
years and you took this course. Wow.
And she said to me, "No." She said, "I don't think it's crazy." She said, "I was teaching kalas before I was married for 3 years." And she said, "You have a good knowledge base of the halachot, and I think you would benefit from taking the course." And so I took the course really without the intention to really start teaching kalas. Even now, even though I say I'm a college teacher, I am, and I teach kalas, but I'm not doing this full time. I'm an optometrist. I go to work full days. I left my house at 7:30 this morning. I just got home tonight at 7:45. I teach college on the side is something that I'm very passionate about, something that I think is very important for women to have access to, very important conversations to be had. And there are so many different types of women out there who need different access to different types of college teachers who maybe they've not had in the past. And so it's something that kind of came to me. People were finding me originally from comments I had made on certain Facebook groups. Recently I started an Instagram page just as something that if I was going to be consuming social media, at least I should be creating rather than just consuming. I decided to put things out there, and I realized that there really is an interest and there really is a need for answers and conversations around these topics in a way that women feel comfortable, women feel supported, women feel their ability to ask the questions and get the answers that they need in a way which is both halachically supported, which is challenging. A lot of times women that are willing to answer these questions and willing to hold these discussions are not always halachically aligned with their value system and hashkafically aligned. They may be more on the modern spectrum or maybe less halachically observant, but very willing to have these conversations because it's more open in the secular world, and that's common. And then in the more right-wing circles, these topics are very much, I don't like to use the word taboo. I like to use the word private, and they are private. The problem is that we live in a modern world which has hypersexualized everything, which has such incredible access to human sexuality and intimacy, and everything is out there. And so many more Jewish women are feeling this lack of Torah-oriented discussions because everything is in the secular perspective, that there was really a lot of interest when I was willing to engage in these discussions that people are like, yes, I'll bite. So that's how I ended up here.
You started doing this when you were 3 years into your own marriage. And I know that you've had some pushback, or a little bit of pushback at least, about being married under a certain amount of time and teaching people. And what do you think that brings to the table?
So that's a great question. And when I originally took the course saying I'm going to teach Kalas, it felt very weird for me. Like, who am I? I'm barely married. And it was only because I had the mentorship from somebody who I respect tremendously. I mean, Nahama Price is not only a PhD, a Torah scholar, a Yoatet halacha. She's published multiple books in Torah topics. She's also an incredible role model in terms of family life. And I've really had a real zchus to learn from her. And to have her say to me, I don't think it's inappropriate for you to do the course, and I don't think it's inappropriate for you to teach Kalas, was really the thing that allowed me to have the confidence to do it. Without that support, I wouldn't have done it because I wouldn't have felt it was appropriate. I did not feel that I had the halachic background. It's not that I felt so confident 3 years out, but I had that guidance and that perspective. And the reality is that, yeah, being married a short time means your perspective is limited. It also means that you have it fresh on your mind of what it is to be a kala. And sometimes you'll hear older women talking about the struggles of, let's say, navigating mikvah when you have teenagers at home, navigating intimacy after you have 5 children, navigating the challenges that come with menopause. And those are incredibly important conversations. We should be having them. Are they really appropriate to be having with a kala? Do you think that it's a good idea to put into a kala's head that, oh, these challenges that you have now, they're nothing. They're just small talk. Actually, this newness, this excitement that comes from being a kala, let's not forget that. I know you've been married 30 years, but have you forgotten what it was like to be a kala? Have you forgotten what it felt like to approach this information for the first time and feel a little bit taken aback, a little bit overwhelmed, caught from left field, completely unsure how this is going to impact your life? Keeping that fresh on the mind is not necessarily a disadvantage. I think in some cases, it can be a strong advantage.
The theme of today's talk is going to be NGLs, which are the not going to lie anonymous questions that the frum world is obsessed with. They're especially obsessed with this when it comes to intimacy. My personal opinion is still developing, but I'm actually very grateful that these NGLs do exist for those who are genuinely trying to find a way to connect without crossing their boundaries and making themselves uncomfortable and regretting. And I do know that when I followed along some of your stories, there were comments like, just you wait, in regards to how you approach intimacy in general when people are asking you as yourself questions. And what is your take on that?
I think in life in general, people that have wisdom to share and positivity to share teach. They help women along. They've navigated challenges and then they share those experiences with women so that they have positive experiences. Women that are struggling, women that have struggled and have not really overcome that, think that everyone around them should have those same struggles, right? And so a lot of times you see this with motherhood. Oh, you think the newborn stage is hard? Just wait till they're toddlers. Oh, you think it's hard to do this when they're toddlers? Little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. You know how many times that's been said to me? As a young mom, I have 3 kids, 5 and under, okay? It's hard enough. You know what would be really helpful is if women who have more children than me, who have older children than me, who've navigated these same challenges, came to me and said, I remember your struggles. And here are the tips that I would give you that if I had known back then would have made my life easier. I don't necessarily look at women who say, oh, you just wait until things get hard, or you just wait till this. If they had navigated it well themselves and had wisdom to share, they would share the wisdom. Instead, they're sharing negativity. And I think it comes from a place of pain, from a place of they have never reconciled their own struggles, their own challenges, and maybe they never had a mentor or a woman to help them navigate it in a positive way. So when I get messages like that where it's like, oh, you just wait until XYZ, I really hope I never have to encounter that challenge. And if I do have to encounter that challenge, I really hope that the mentors in my life, the yoatzot halacha I turn to, the older women in my life, my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, could give me perspective and wisdom. My feeling is that if women have struggled and then they've overcome those struggles and they've learned how to navigate them with grace and clarity, they would then share that grace and clarity with the younger women to empower them and show them how to do that. When somebody says, oh, you just wait, it tells me that they've had a struggle. They've not been given the guidance to overcome that struggle. They've
They're still
suffered.
in the middle of their own thing. It's like, see me. Someone see me. So that's a lot of
Correct.
what I think you get. A lot of just like people begging to be seen in their struggle.
Correct. And listen, if I encounter a struggle that they're describing, then I would turn to the women in my life who've navigated similar struggles. I have yoatzot halacha who have been doing this for many, many years. I have female mentors that I look up to. If I encounter a struggle, I have people that I would go to help me rather than to look at me and say, oh, you think this is hard? Just wait. It gets harder. It's like, why? Help me fix it. Help me. Right? Instead of just discouraging.
I know we've talked a lot about on our own about relationships and how we sometimes need a stand-in because not everyone has a mother or an aunt or someone in their life that can lead them and guide them through these things. But I do want to say that as someone who's married for longer than you've been married and watching your content and how you answer questions, there's something remarkable about being reminded about the newness and the freshness when facing issues that don't come up till later. Because sometimes it's like, what got us here? Where did we begin? How did we start? And sometimes that is actually a very powerful reminder. So I appreciate that. I know other people, I'm sure, appreciate that as well. And you don't need to have 30 years of marriage experience to infuse and remind people what got us here, what the overall attitude really is that's guiding our lives when we get stuck in whatever rut we're stuck in or struggle we're struggling with. So I know I appreciate that. I'm going to go straight for some of the NGLs. And number one on the list of the ones you get NGLs about the wedding night. What do you answer to those NGLs about the wedding night?
So I think one of the most common NGLs that really come up is, do you have to consummate the marriage on the wedding night? That is something that I've seen discussed. It's something that I've seen kind of pushed and promoted and debated, and that I've heard really negative perspectives on from various women sharing their own perspectives. And so I think the way that we answer this question is critical as a college teacher. When somebody asks the question, do you have to consummate the marriage on the wedding night? I think it's really important that the answer be no, no. And the reason I say that is there's two reasons. The first is that consent is required for Jewish law, meaning when you teach Hilchot Tznius, you teach the laws of intimacy, you understand that it's usher for a husband to rape his wife. And therefore, if a wife says no, it is usher for her husband to force her and consummate the marriage. And it's usher for the husband to tell her, well, my chassan teacher said we have to. And even though you're saying no, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's a mitzvah. And it's important for college to know that that's wrong. And it's absolutely prohibited. So that's the first reason. The answer has to be no. But the second reason the answer has to be no is because so many couples, normal, healthy, excited couples, are so excited to try to consummate the marriage. And then they find that it's not as easy as they thought it was going to be. And they will try and not be, for lack of a better word, successful. Meaning they will try and they'll encounter some type of technical difficulty, whether that's on her end, his end, or both. It might be funny, it might be awkward, but it doesn't end in a consummation of the marriage. And we don't look at those couples and say, you failed. We don't look at those couples and say, you did not achieve your mitzvah, you did something wrong. It's a very damaging perspective to have because it puts this very deep pressure on a couple. The underlying question really deserves to be explored. The majority of women and men are looking forward to consummating the marriage. Maybe not the second they walk into the room. I think there has to be an understanding that things go slowly, that there's a workup to things. It's not 0 to 100 in a minute. It doesn't work that way. That's not how human physiology works. That's not how female arousal works. That's not how anything is going to be good and positive. And so that's an important conversation as well. But many couples are looking forward to that experience. So when somebody comes and says, well, do I have to? The implication is almost that there's some hesitation, there's some fear, there's something underlying it. And I think when, as a teacher, you encounter that, you have to really try to understand, where is that question coming from? Is it coming from a place of normal nervousness, meaning what if it doesn't happen that night because we're just too tired and we fall asleep? Did we do something wrong?
I do notice that a lot of people are asking questions. Do I have to? Am I allowed? Should I? And that language is like when we explore a halacha. And when it comes to like relationships in general and emotional health, that's not really the right question to ask.
I agree. It's very important that couples understand that there's a positivity to consummate the marriage. There's certainly a mitzvah to consummate the marriage. It's actually a really important element. And as a college teacher, you'd be remiss to not encourage consummation of marriage as soon as possible. And that's the way, the language that I use very carefully, which is that it's strongly encouraged as soon as you're able to. And the way that I frame it is that you should try as soon as you're able. And that removes the pressure of firstly succeeding, because we want to encourage attempt. Attempt is success. Trying, connecting, having a positive experience, even if it doesn't end in specific actions, trying is viewed as successful. And that means going slow enough so that you are comfortable with the process. That this is not something where you're like, oh my gosh, the clock is about to strike midnight and my college teacher said I have to consummate on the wedding night. It's completely a wrong thing. As soon as you're able means going slowly, doing what you need to do without that intense pressure, but recognizing that there are intentional encouragements toward consummating the marriage. And a lot of college teachers, I would say, get taken out of context. I would say for two reasons. There's good reasons to encourage it as soon as possible. One of them, I don't like the idea behind it. The first reason is the concern over hashchatat zera, meaning some college teachers and some chazan teachers want to encourage it as soon as possible. Why? Because we're nervous that the man is not going to be able to control himself, right? And we're going to have a hashchatat zera issue. That's one answer I've seen kind of put out there. And I don't love the answer. It's very common for men, when they're first learning to navigate intimacy, to have premature ejaculation, for ejaculation to occur outside of the vagina. And at least in my teachings and my background with Nishma and the Yoatzot program, it's very difficult to condemn that action when it's in the context of trying, when it's in the context of attempting and learning intimacy. It's also important to note that with regards to hashchatat zera, there's a lot of room for being very makil as long as it's in the vicinity of or in the direction of the opening. The second answer, and this is really important for women to understand, is that until the marriage is consummated, or at least an attempt is made, and there's varying degrees of exactly what needs to be done, there's a prohibition of yichud if the woman becomes nida. And therefore, when I have a woman say to me, like, I want to wait X number of days before we try because I want to have time to cuddle and touch it. It's a great concept until you've been the one picking up the phone call of the woman who said, you know, I got married 2 days ago and I just started spotting. What can I do? Are we allowed to still try? Like what goes on? And it's very challenging because then, even if they've removed the issue of yichud, now the next time, if she becomes nida before they consummate it, she goes to the mikvah. She comes home, they successfully consummate the marriage. Now she has dam basula. Now they separate again for another nida period. And now, as soon as she goes to the mikvah this next time, she's getting her period right after. And it can be very stressful and very difficult emotionally on the marriage. So there's good reason to encourage it, keeping in mind that a lot of women don't realize it may take multiple days to be successful. Go in with an open mind. If on the wedding night you are able to try because you feel comfortable and you've worked up to things, fantastic. If you feel you need a little bit more time, you don't have to feel bad to go in with a closed mind of I'm only going to start trying after 48 hours. I don't think is a positive thing either. So there is reason to encourage, but when we encourage, we have to remove the language of pressure. We have to remove the language of chiyuv. We have to promote it as encouragement and as very positive, as a mitzvah, but not as an isser. Do you know what the biggest killer of intimacy for women is? Pressure. That can actually create challenges in consummating the marriage that you definitely didn't intend to create.
That leads us to the next NGL topic, which is lingerie. And people have a lot of interesting questions. around that topic, and how do you navigate those?
So I think lingerie is a very interesting topic. As from women, we are taught so heavily, we are so heavily invested in the concept of tznius. It can be very challenging emotionally for women to think of first being fully undressed in front of their husbands, or second, to wear something that is so intentionally sexualized or so intensely provocative when they've been taught that that's a horrible thing to do and they should never behave that way. It's really important that women understand that looking sexual in the context of their marriage, when they are tahora, with the intention to connect with their spouse in that way and engage in intimacy, is not inappropriate. It's not a lack of tzniut. And also at the same time recognizing that that feeling of is this tznius can sometimes take some time to navigate. And I think with kalas, they deserve grace when it comes to their comfort level. So what I always explain to kalas is that lingerie is a very broad term. For some people, lingerie is a beautiful nightgown, maybe satin or silk. Think of something that's very sensual to touch, with a robe that's very full coverage that would make a woman feel very comfortable and not exposed or hypersexualized. Compare that with things that are much more provocative or something that you would expect to see on a Victoria's Secret runway, which many women would gasp at hearing that, but may be very open to those types of things later on. What does a woman feel comfortable in? What does she feel beautiful in? Lingerie can be used to really open up the invitation for intimacy. You're signaling to your husband, I'm open, I'm receptive. And that can be very useful for women, especially those who may be more shy verbally. But there's also that big range of what your coverage level is. You definitely do not need to put on something that you feel uncomfortable because you think your husband expects that. I think that's a very damaging thing to say. I think as the marriage progresses, it's a great conversation to have of what do you find attractive? Is there something particular? I love that. I think being open to each other's preferences, learning about each other, thinking about ways that excite your spouse and being open to both of those experiences is beautiful, but I think especially at the beginning, we have to be sensitive to that tznius element, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. I don't think that's a crazy piece of advice. Something that was interesting that had actually come out on my, not gonna lies, on my Instagram page was a few people had said that their college teachers recommended this. The recommendation was actually to shower together the night of the wedding. I can be honest with you, I had never heard that recommendation, and it's not a recommendation I personally make to kalas because so many kalas express that hesitation about being fully undressed in front of their spouse, how much more so in bright lighting in a bathroom. Unless a kala is fully ready, that's something they want to explore. Kol kavod, I'm fully supportive. But so many kalas are nervous about that. Take your time. There are halachot surrounding intimacy with the lights on versus off. And it's important to acknowledge that halachically, the lights are supposed to be off during intercourse. And there's no reason, especially early on, that you need to be fully undressed in front of your spouse the moment you get married. Yes, there's nothing shameful, there's nothing embarrassing, but right at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with having a little bit more of a reservation. Dim lighting is a great option because it really takes that pressure and that scrutiny off of the woman's body. Everybody looks better in mood lighting. Everybody looks better in candlelight, and it can make women feel so much more comfortable to feel like they're not exposed in a way that they're not comfortable with, and they know that there's no pressure on that end for themselves.
How many questions on NGL do you get about spotting and the stress about becoming a nida?
I would say a lot. I actually try to stay away too much from answering the halachic questions, and the reason is because when it comes to the halachas of becoming nida, it takes me at least 2 hours to teach that. That's a whole lesson that I have. Becoming nida is one of the topics that I teach. And there's different categories. Women need to understand that the D'Oraisa laws are all treated differently. They have different stringency levels and they have different implications. I really can't answer halachic shaylas on my page. But what I really always emphasize is that the laws of spotting are complex. And there are two options when it comes to it. One option is you need to really learn them well. You need to be comfortable reviewing your notes. I give out notes very clearly of what the laws of spotting are. And when there are basics that are not fundamentally understood by women, it creates a lot of unnecessary questions because what they really need to do is review the halachot, to sit down with somebody and go through the categories and separate it for themselves in their mind of what are the steps here that need to be answered. The other alternative, when you have a question, you need to have somebody that you can ask, and not just a not gonna lie anonymous box. But if you have a question about staining, you need to message somebody who can actually stop you and say, okay, wait. Where was this found? When was this found? Is there any other context of this that I need to be aware of? And then ask you all the appropriate questions so that they can give you an appropriate answer. Sometimes it's clear as day. Somebody like me who's just a college teacher can answer that question. It's just a straight halacha, yes or no. The same way that you could call me and say, oh my gosh, I put milk in my fleshig bowl and I ate it. And I say, oh, was it cold? And you're like, yes, it was cold. And I'm like, okay, so did you wash it yet? You're like, no. Like, okay, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to take it to the sink. You're going to rinse it out with lukewarm water. Then you're going to soap it up. You're going to rinse it out, make sure it's super clean. And then you can wash it with hot water after. And you don't have to ask a shaila. That's not a psak. That's basic halacha. Sometimes it requires a little bit more nuance. And so that's the times where a yoetz halacha is really useful, or speaking to your rep directly and just gaining clarity on your particular situation. The distinction between a stain and a flow can be very, very challenging. And that's a scenario where really you need somebody who's an expert in this. It really is a job for yoetz halacha, and it's a job for a rav. It's very important that you get the right guidance. An anonymous box is never going to get you the clarity that you need.
I've seen you say, like, I'm a college teacher, I'm not your college teacher, and answers like that, which I think really give people, they might frustrate people for sure, but I think that it really gives a very clear set of like boundaries for how to think about things when you're throwing questions into the abyss online. Like, I can answer based on what I teach, which is from your background, from your training, from your mesorah, whatever that is, but it's not yours necessarily. So I do like that when you like say,
give you an example of exactly why I always say I'm a college teacher. I'm not your college teacher. So I had somebody reached out to me via DM, and I get a lot of DMs. Sometimes I respond more than others. But this one, somebody said to me, she's like, I have a question regarding ONA, the onos, meaning related to vesto. And I don't want to ask my college teacher because she's a family member of mine. So I was wondering if I could ask you. And I said, if I can provide clarity, I'd love to provide clarity. So the question was about if somebody just finds out that they're newly pregnant, do they have to observe vesto that first month? And it's a great question. And there's differences of opinion depending on which Rav you ask. And so I said, it's going to depend on, which Rav you ask. It also may depend on, is there an established veset kavua or a veset she'eno kavua? And she said, wait, what's a veset kavua? So I said, an established veset. And she said, wait, what's a veset? And either she has not been taught, it really doesn't understand what I'm talking about at all because she didn't learn it at all, or because the language that her teacher used does not match that I've been taught and that is in the sources and that is generally discussed. And so it's really impossible for me to answer her questions if I can't be certain that she has the background to actually understand the question. So when I have my own kala who comes to me with a question of vesto, and I'm the one who taught them vesto in the first place, I can be certain that they understand my answer. But it became so clear to me that this woman wasn't even in a place that she could understand my answer. And you know why? Because she never spent the time learning with me what is all these concepts that you need to first give definitions to in order to have an intellectual conversation about it. And so I had to basically say, I'm like, listen, I can't do a 2-hour review investment on a DM in Instagram teaching a kala. We do a whole 2-hour discussion on vesto. I can't summarize that for you in 3 seconds of DMs when you don't have the language to have the conversation with me.
This is an interesting question. When people ask you what to do, Nida leaves you with a window to have intimacy with your husband. What happens when you and your husband are not getting along?
That's a very big challenge. That's a very big challenge. When spouses are not getting along, when there's a challenge in the marriage in general, I don't think this particular question is related to Nida versus not Nida. I think it speaks to relationships in general. You have to decide what you're doing. And when people get married with the intention of we are building a life together, we've made a commitment. We're not walking away from this. And I would make the assumption further is that you want to be happy. You want to be in a strong marriage. So if you recognize that there's something going on, there's some tension, there's underlying unresolved issues, there's communication blockages, that's when you seek help. And I'm not talking about a chat box on Instagram. I'm talking about a professional. Sometimes that professional might be a Rav to provide some guidance, but oftentimes it involves therapy because when people are having challenges, and especially a lot of these challenges do emerge from poor communication styles or inappropriate responses to certain things, people that have passive-aggressive behaviors, things that are not conducive to having a healthy, supportive marriage, they need actual guidance from a professional, from either a marriage therapist, an individual therapist, so each of them can work on their individual traits that are making this challenging and work on building that. Because at the end of the day, when there are challenges in a relationship, they're very common. There's nothing wrong with you, but you have a choice. The choice is either fix it. Choice 2 is be miserable and don't. And choice 3 is walk away from the marriage and get a divorce. And I don't think being miserable is a good option, and I don't think being divorced is a good option. I think that realistically, we have two people who just need to work on themselves and some skills. Get the help you need, get guidance, lock in, and put in that effort to fix marriage. Again, this is assuming that both members of the couple are invested enough to want to make that change and are mentally healthy enough to do so. Chas v'shalom, nobody should think that I'm talking about a woman single-sidedly putting an effort to improve a marriage when chas v'shalom she's in an abusive situation. When you have two people who are struggling to communicate because their communication styles are just not lining up, or you have somebody who, for whatever reason, developed a very defensive communication style. Somebody else is very passive-aggressive or explosive in their communication, and the other person gets very defensive. You can work on those things. Those are skills. You're not born with it necessarily. It's not intuitive for every person. They're skills. And there are actually professionals out there. They're called therapists. Sometimes they're psychologists. Sometimes they're licensed mental health professionals. Maybe they're a social work, whatever it is. There are people that specialize in this. Hire one. And the one thing I will say, do you know what's a lot more expensive than investing in marriage therapy? Divorce. There's nothing more expensive than a divorce. So a lot of people don't want to invest the time and the money it takes to build these skills and fix these issues. But if there's an issue, fix it or don't. Those are basically your two options. And I highly encourage people, get the help, get it early on. Don't wait. Don't let it fester. Get the help and get it quickly.
What are your thoughts when people ask about pushing themselves to be intimate when they're trying to make that choice to make things work?
So I think that's a very good question. And I think that a lot of it depends on your perspective of intimacy. Now, I want to back up. I want to give a caveat here. When people ask that question a lot of times, what do you think about pushing yourself to have intimacy? Because this is a question that I had recently got that I suggested that we discuss. I didn't interpret it as when there's serious marital issues. When there are serious marital issues, there are going to be serious intimacy issues. And it's very difficult to say push through one and not the other. They're intrinsically combined. What I think many women struggle with is they don't necessarily feel in the mood, shall we say. Their husband is. There's nothing fundamentally terrible about their marriage. Things are not bad per se, but they're not in the mood. And they're debating, should I push myself to be intimate when I'm not feeling it? And for that scenario, in an overall positive, normal, healthy, typical marriage that's not falling apart, back up and think of what is our perspective, what is our hashkafa surrounding what intimacy means. Because that question itself implies something that I don't like. To me, and one of the perspectives that I try to share is that intimacy, and specifically sex and intercourse, is an opportunity for holy, spiritual connection between husband and wife. There is a very powerful line in Bereshit where it says, Al ken ya'azov ish et aviv et imo v'dabak be'ishto v'hiyu lebasar echad. And what's very powerful about that statement is that it's a statement made by Hashem describing the fundamental nature of marriage. And it includes physical intimacy. You'll notice it doesn't say v'hayu lev echad. It doesn't say v'hayu nefesh echad. It doesn't say v'hayu moach echad. It says lebasar echad. There is something fundamental, powerful, and holy. Hashem describes very intentionally that the important element, like al ken ya'azov isha t'mivatimo v'tabak be'ishto v'hayu lebasar echad, is a fundamental core of a marriage. It is a positive thing, and it is a holy way in which couples connect. And when you view it in that way, this is an opportunity to connect with your spouse. This isn't a job to provide something for them. I hate when people suggest that your husband has a sexual need and you are responsible for fulfilling that. Chas v'shalom. I really think that's a very damaging way to speak to women about this, because this is an opportunity for both members of the couple to connect on a physical and elevated spiritual level as well. When you frame it in that way, it becomes very challenging to understand the question of what do you mean to push yourself to connect to your spouse? It sounds almost like the person asking the question is viewing intimacy as transactional, as if my husband treats me XYZ way, or he does the dishes, or he does XYZ, then I will reward him by sleeping with him. I think that's a very dangerous way to frame this, because this isn't one person providing for the other. This is a mutually important way to connect and express love and desire and connection for both spouses. Yes, it should be physically pleasurable for both spouses. And the craziest part is that human physiology and biology support the fact that close physical connection and human pleasure results in bonding. We know that the hormones released after orgasm, which include oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the love hormone, and dopamine, create this really positive association and strong bond between the couple. And so by saying you have to push through, it's like we're missing that perspective, that hashkafic perspective of this is an opportunity for both members to connect, to have pleasure with each other, and to elevate their marriage and their relationship in a physical and emotional way. Perhaps there's a misunderstanding in what intimacy is actually all about to begin with. It's very sad because I think a lot of people have this misconception. I think a lot of women think that the role of intimacy is to satisfy their husband's desires. That is the furthest thing from what it's designed to be, and it's simply untrue. In fact, all the halachic sources flip it the opposite way, where actually a lot of intimacy is about connecting to the woman, and the husband's role of mitzvahs ona is to actually appeal to his wife. The Chachamim discuss extensively in the sources about how he needs to use his words to arouse desire in his wife, and how he needs to use chibuk and nishuk, hugging and kissing, to arouse his wife. That's what we would call today foreplay. The Chachamim thought it was relevant to instruct husbands on the importance of foreplay in creating desire in their wife so that they can connect in this positive, beautiful way where it's enjoyable for the wife, as opposed to this idea that women are supposed to provide sexual gratification for men. We never owe that to our husbands, actually. It's not halachically required of us. It is, however, halachically required of the husband. And I think it's important that women know this, that men know this, and that it's emphasized in our hashkafa and our value system of what we're teaching about intimacy.
When I see the language of those questions of like pushing through or do I have to, I almost want to like talk to the person and say, if you sense resistance, it's okay to self-reflect and see if there's something you need right now. Because that resistance is like the language we have with ourselves. And a lot of the time it doesn't have so much to do with intimacy. It has to do with communication. It has to do with a different aspect of the relationship. Like you said, it's all one and the same. So sometimes I do want to just talk to whoever's posting questions that are worded that way and say, don't ignore what you're feeling. Figure it out. The best is if you can figure out together and then connect over that. But don't ignore it and push through. No, if you're going to create a situation where you're just like breeding resentment, I don't think that's beneficial, but I do think that it's usually a message. So much of what desire is and what marriage is, and every element of life is a message. It is a diagnostic, it's a gauge for like where we are and how to connect next. So
I agree. I think that there's one other element that I would add. If somebody doesn't relate to the hashkafa of this is a beautiful way to mutually connect, I think something that does relate to a lot of people is the idea is that if something is important to your spouse, it's therefore important to you. So if I come home from work and I'm really hungry and I haven't eaten dinner, and I tell my husband, I'm really hungry, I haven't eaten dinner, and he's like, oh, well, I already ate. I wouldn't even know what to say to that. What do you mean I'm hungry? Therefore, we're hungry.
You're eating now.
Correct. Therefore, I would expect him to be interested in the fact that I'm hungry, help me get something to eat, and maybe accompany me while I eat that food. That would be my expectation.
Connection. Isn't that what it's called? A bid for connection. A successful marriage.
If something is important to me,
their bid for connection.
I expect that it's important to him. And therefore, when I also hear this is if a husband is having this interest, this desire for connection, a bid for connection, or even this physical pull to his wife, and the wife's response is, why should I do that? Then to me, there's something fundamental about the relationship where maybe both members of the couple don't see it that way, where they don't see that each other's needs or wants or interests are automatically theirs. It is automatic because you're one unit. So if one member of the spouse wants something or one member of the spouse is feeling a certain way, that by definition means that both of you are feeling that way, right? And you can have conversations about it and you can navigate it. And of course, there are plenty of things that I'm interested in that my husband isn't particularly interested in, but he's going to pretend to be interested in and he'll listen to them anyway, because that's part of being in a marriage. We are on one level, basar echad. We are one flesh. We are one human.
To feel the same way in a couple for it to be important.
Correct.
If you have a hobby that your spouse does not think is that exciting, but you're excited about it, in a good marriage, you don't have to force it. You will be excited about what your partner is excited about.
100%. 100%. And I think the same thing when it comes to intimacy. If you are in a strong marriage, if you have a close emotional relationship, when your spouse expresses desire, isn't that your desire too? And when it's not, it tells me that there's often something underlying, something disconnected in the overall communication and relationship that maybe deserves a little bit more working through.
A lot of the NGLs ask questions about birth control, especially as it pertains to need. And obviously, you're not the doctor, but college teachers do have a special insight when it comes to this. So share what questions you've gotten recently and how you responded. What's your go-to recommendation? How do you approach questions about birth control, scheduling, needs, things like that?
So these are very broad questions. The wedding is the biggest question and the most relevant to me as a college teacher. And I think that's part of my job, actually. Scheduling weddings is a part of my job. It's one of the first things I do with every kala. And the first question I actually ask a kala before I even do this is, what has your thought process been with regards to birth control? There are some women that do not want to use hormonal birth control at all, in which case I'm not going to promote or push hormonal birth control on somebody. There are some women who want to avoid a chuppahs nida with short-term hormonal manipulation, like agestin, in which case, fantastic. So I will work with them on explaining to them what they need to do schedule-wise and how to get a prescription form for that from their OBGYN. Many women have already decided if they plan to use hormonal contraception before they meet with me. Oftentimes, women don't just go on birth control so that they can schedule their weddings. Oftentimes, women go on birth control because they want to be on birth control for a few months after their wedding, which is very reasonable. A schedule that I love for kalas, if a woman wants to use hormonal contraception, I love to have at least 3 months for a kala to be on something prior to make sure that any side effects have been kind of worked out. But we have the option to manipulate the cycle. And the goal is so that she should be expecting her period about a day or so after the wedding. But the goal is that she continues to take those hormones at exactly the same dose until she consummates marriage and already separates because of Dam Sulin. At that point, she will stop taking her hormonal contraception. She can take out her NuvaRing, whatever method she was using, wait for her period to start, and then we basically extend that initial nida separation by a few days, but it's one combined, a little bit longer nida instead of close nidas back to back. What then many women love to do, and I definitely encourage this if you're already using hormonal contraception, is to stack your birth control for a little bit longer to actually see if we can get another few weeks before we have any spotting issues, which can give a couple a lot more time to acclimate to their newly physical relationship and can be very, very useful to couples. Does it work for all couples? No. Anytime we use pills, it is not a guarantee that your body is going to respond perfectly to it, but many women find this very successful, and it is very, very commonly used. What happens when a woman doesn't want to use hormonal contraception? Well, if she has a regular cycle, fantastic. Assuming that the stress of her wedding, the anxiety, her changes in diet, everything going on doesn't at all impact her cycle, right? That's fantastic. And then the final alternative when it comes to wedding is to actually have a chuppahs nida. And I have had kalas that have chosen very intentionally to not use any hormonal manipulation for the intention of trying to conceive as soon as humanly possible, just age being a factor, a concern. And that's a choice. And those kalas have handled that decision with autonomy and grace. Anytime we make choices, those choices have to come with an understanding. All forms of birth control have risks associated with them. They have side effect profiles, but the benefits oftentimes outweigh those risks. And it's really important for a woman to be able to articulate, why is it that she's choosing to use birth control? Why is it that she's choosing to use this form of birth control over that form? It's not enough to just say this causes that. You need to understand that when you sign up for something. And it's really the job of an OBGYN to kind of give those parameters to women as they're prescribing medications. Not always done, but that would be the ideal. But for women to actually own that decision. And what's very important is that when it comes to using birth control, not just a conversation of your own desire, it is also a halacha conversation of where is the permissibility of the use of hormonal contraception. I will say, in my post-gym realm, the use of hormonal birth control is very widely accepted when the desire to delay having children comes from the woman. When it comes from her own mental health, her own physical health, and her own concerns, there's a lot more permissibility. I think that many rabbis in the yeshivish world and the more right-wing world have actually come around and started to permit and even encourage the use of hormonal birth control, having seen so many women, unfortunately, get pregnant quickly and then have issues where marriage falls apart and you have young women with babies that if they had just used birth control a few months, these issues would have come out right away. Things wouldn't have ended in this particular manner. And rabbis have seen those issues. We've also learned a lot about maternal fetal health, maternal mental health in particular, and in general, what women's bodies need in order to recover. So, for example, my psak gives a blanket heter for 2 years post-childbirth. Why? Because really many OBGYNs really do recommend that type of spacing between children just to protect the mother's body and allow her to replenish her stores. Now, does every woman need that long? No. So many rabbis these days are willing to hear that, are willing to respect it, and are very open to granting women that permissibility. And what's also very important for women to know is that there are non-hormonal birth control options that exist. And if a woman wants to space children and wants to avoid the use of certain medications, the use of certain hormones for her own belief, for her own health, whatever her goals are, those options exist and she should seek them out and learn them and really understand that there's a combination here between the value of Pira Uravu as well as the desire to have a continued Jewish marriage, raise your children with a healthy and functional mother, and just being really realistic. And there's become a lot more acceptance surrounding the permissibility of child spacing in ways that I think are somewhat surprising in some circles, but it's become necessary.
I appreciate that take that you have, like showing value and the risks, because especially when people are planning a wedding, I know there are a lot of voices that are speaking that are very outspoken, I should say, about more natural methods of birth control. When it comes to planning a wedding, sometimes the risk to the benefits is a little different, and everyone has to take into account what that is for them. Because for some people, a chuppah nida would be the end of the world. And so in that case, there are many options, and people should know that even if they're not intending to stay on birth control.
I just want to add to that with the chuppah nida, the first kala that I had with the chuppah nida, she handles it really, I mean, I have to give her props. She was so calm. She wasn't stressed out about it. She made a very intentional choice regarding her own fertility, and she owned that decision. At the time, I had to use every ounce of kind of like holding myself back from thinking, would I have been okay with this? Would this have been a choice I would have made? But the truth is, it's not my choice to make. As a kala teacher, my role is not to put my own personal feelings onto my kalas. My job is to educate them about their options. And at that point, to actually support them in making informed, educated decisions. When a woman tells me she understands the implications of chuppah nida and has made a choice of what's best for her in her marriage, my job is to support that. And so I will never be somebody who's going to be outspoken anti-birth control and also pro-birth control. I think it's important that women be able to make informed decisions. And that includes not fear-mongering. It includes not making up things and basically putting women into this state of fear when understanding that the use of all medications comes with risks. That's just the way the world works. Advil comes with tons of risks. People don't talk about the risks. I teach a pharmacology class when I tutor for the optometry boards. Some of these medications that seem very benign can cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome, a very severe reaction. They can cause long-term complications. You know what? We still use them when we need them. And therefore, women have the option to choose. And I think something that kind of gets downplayed is sexual freedom that many forms of contraception give to women. So women being able to space their cycles so that they're not nida all the time every month when they're not trying to conceive. Women being able to schedule their cycles so that they are not nida over really important life events or when they're going on specific vacations. That provides tremendous benefit. And yes, there are health risks associated with any medication. There are side effects, sure. But if a woman understands those side effects and appreciates the benefits to her own life, and makes a decision, I think coming out very strongly and saying it's damaging, it's terrible, it's this, isn't intellectually honest. What is the risk? What is the benefit? Let's have a real conversation of how much risk are we willing to accept in order for the benefit that we're seeking to achieve here.
Next, NGL. This was a hot topic. Female self-pleasure.
People love to ask this question, and I think the reason they love to ask it is
the anonymity around the opportunity to ask.
Every single time I open my Not Gonna Lies, I get a question about female masturbation without fail. And I think it's so interesting that so many women have the question, and very few of them have ever been willing to ask the question out loud.
It makes so much sense to me because we have a theme of shame around anything of a sexual nature. So to me, it makes so much sense. But I'm afraid that none of the answers they're getting through an NGL are going to satisfy that shame because they're feeding into it by still being anonymous and not really getting their personal questions answered.
I get the question so often that I've almost stopped giving the full context to my answer, but I've shared this a few times on my Instagram. And when I've said this, people have been absolutely shocked at like, how could you? I remember I was in seminary and there was a point where I had heard in the yeshivas, they were running this campaign against masturbation, Shmiras Habris. They were talking about it nonstop in the yeshivas. And if you abstain from masturbation, they were taking the boys out to papagayos. And I was like, what? And keep in mind, they had never once in my life given a talk, a halachic discussion, anything related to female masturbation. But the boys' schools are talking about this so much. They're offering a reward. This is crazy to me. So I actually went up to one of the teachers in the seminar. I said, listen, I got to talk to you about this. I said, this is what's going on. I am beyond curious. What's the story for female masturbation? And she's like, what's that? Very well educated. And she basically looked at me and she said, the reason why we're not giving shiurim and we're not giving lectures to young women about it is because it's mutter. She's like, it's very hard to argue that it's usser. She's like, you can make an argument that it's not recommended. She's like, you can make an argument that it may be a derivation of kiddushim tehiyut. There's no rabbi who's going to say, oh, it's a very great thing. We can recognize that's not a Torahic value. It doesn't make any sense to encourage or promote it. So therefore, we're not going to be having these talks and lectures basically saying it's mutter enjoy. And I asked her further about pornography usage, and this takeaway on pornography was a little bit more permissive back in the day, and I've actually developed a stronger take anti-pornography about this. But I think it's very clear that watching pornography is prohibited, and there's an idea of Shmiras Einayim for what we consume and what we fantasize about. For sure, lo taturu from the perspective of women watching it. And there's definitely an absolute prohibition against watching intercourse. We know that Zimri and Cosby were publicly executed by Pinchas for having intercourse publicly. To watch people have intercourse is very obviously against Torah values. It desecrates and destroys the holiness of what intimacy is meant to be. And so there's no context in which I would ever encourage watching visual pornography. That being said, the concern of hashchatat zera, which is why there's such this focus on prohibiting male masturbation, just doesn't have a correlative prohibition for women. And therefore, there is no prohibition explicitly for women. And therefore, female self-stimulation is not expressly prohibited. Is there anyone who's going to say you should encourage it? No. However, something that I think is really important is that it can be a very important tool for women opening up and exploring pleasure within their own marriage. And the reason I say that is because I have had people say they've never been able to experience pleasure with their husbands. They've never been able to experience an orgasm. And they are concerned, upset about, and have curiosities about it. And the first question that I would ask is, what gives you pleasure on your own? And when a woman says to me, well, I've never tried. And I say, well, that's an issue. Meaning, if you are not willing and open to explore pleasure, then how could you expect it to magically manifest in just the context of your marriage? Things take time. There are so many benefits to women being comfortable with their anatomy, comfortable exploring their bodies. And actually, as a teacher, not only do I teach anatomy, but I will have this conversation with colleagues of how do we take those experiences and translate them and bring them into a positive experience that can be then shared with your spouse, because there's a very damaging narrative, which is that somehow men will know what to do in the bedroom. From where? Where would he know that? A nice, frum boy, where would he know that from? I certainly hope he's never seen a couple in bed. If he is watching pornography, that's even way worse because it's very unrealistic and completely the antithesis of what we would want him to be learning. That's not the skills we'd want to be picking up. So from where would he know that information? Meaning maybe he knows an anatomy textbook. When I got married, my husband and I were both biology majors in college. We had both learned anatomy textbooks. It doesn't make you an expert in human sexuality. When a woman knows her own anatomy, understands her own anatomy and how she experiences pleasure, and then can introduce her husband to that, as opposed to kind of throwing him into the deep end, how would he know?
There's so much shame around pleasure. This keeps playing in my mind. Shame around pleasure. If you could start unraveling that already pre-wedding, girls could have a different experience going into marriage without having to navigate this shame around enjoyment.
It doesn't make any sense. It does not make any halachic sense when you read the sources and you consider mitzvahs ona. It does not make sense for the amount of shame that has seeped into Jewish culture. I would almost venture to argue that we have gotten this from other cultures, perhaps from Christian purity culture.
Chaya Reich on the podcast that we just had on the Out of Town podcast says we did a good job raising Christian girls.
Absolutely. It is a Christian value, not a Jewish one. I don't know where it came from. It's not in the Jewish literature. It's not in the original sources. It's certainly not in the Torah. It's certainly not in the Gemara. I don't know where we got this shame and this concern over women being embarrassed about embracing pleasure, women being embarrassed to enjoy intimacy, when the Chachamim were very concerned about her enjoying intimacy with her husband, and the whole discussion of mitzvahs ona and how he owes her a certain amount of frequency and a certain amount of effort and literally foreplay. And women are so concerned and so shameful. It's like people always want to talk about misogyny. In some instances, we almost do this to ourselves. The people teaching tzniut and shaming women for their bodies are most frequently women. It's not coming from the rabbinic sources in many cases. And I think it's really important to have women out there who are willing to say, this is not Torah values. There is no legitimate reason why these feelings are being promoted, why they're being indulged. And in fact, we need to work really hard to eradicate them.
When people are asking, am I allowed? They're basically looking at other people. They don't even understand that the context is you and your husband. That's it.
Correct.
That you are, that's what the magic of this Jewish marriage and world is. You're creating your own mikdash ma'at. That's your own context for what is good and right and wonderful for you. Go through your stories. Like there's this underlying theme of, am I allowed to decide what I like? Am I allowed to have conversations about things? Am I allowed to create my own pace? That's a lot of what I see the questions end up at the end of the day. How can couples learn more to either enhance their relationship sexually or to navigate difficulties?
If we think about approaching it from a physical perspective, I think at the beginning, I think it's important for couples to know that every couple has to learn these skills. And the only way to learn the skills is to practice them physically. You can have kala classes and chassan classes and anatomy classes and discussions surrounding the concepts of intimacy. But until you are there, in that physical experience, you are talking in hypothetical realm. And it is very challenging. I always explain this to college. Like, we're going to have a conversation about sex and intimacy that's completely theoretical, but you really have no idea what I'm talking about for the most part. Again, assuming that this is a kala who's never been intimate before. Obviously, I work with plenty of kalas who have, in which case it's a much more practical conversation because they actually know a lot more about what I'm talking about. But for a kala that never has, I say this is a theoretical conversation. And what I don't like is to create issues that are not there. Some couples will have certain issues. Some couples will have others. Some couples will have no issues at all. How will they know? They will navigate it physically. If they encounter an issue, that's a moment where you need to be able to call somebody. You need to be able to call your kala teacher or your chassan teacher or your rav, or maybe you have an older sister who's really there for you and really understands and can provide that for you. It needs to be somebody who can guide you. Sometimes issues are non-issues, meaning it's normal, takes a little bit of time, takes time for couples to figure out things on their own. And we have to give them time and space to do that. For most couples, it's a process, it's a learning curve, and it's a learning curve that is experienced. However, when something is concerning or doesn't feel right, you have to reach out to somebody who has experience navigating these issues. And sometimes when I'll hear an issue, my response is totally normal. Everything will be fine. Give it another few tries and check back in with me. And sometimes immediately an issue deserves a referral out, whether to a therapist, a sex therapist, a pelvic floor therapist, an OBGYN, to explore physical, psychological barriers to intimacy that are creating issues. By the way, urologists for men can also be a very important resource as well, really depending on what the issue is. But the whole point being is that you need to first give yourself an opportunity to experience, to learn, to struggle perhaps, to fail, to explore, to laugh, to give yourself grace of you're navigating something new. This is normal. All of it's normal. But if you're concerned and there's something that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't really feel like it's within the realm of normal, that we can make an appropriate referral of where you can go to get appropriate help. Sometimes there are medical concerns or psychological concerns that really deserve attention And those should be dealt with as soon as possible, as soon as you feel that something's not right. And a college teacher should be good at assessing, does this sound like typical early on, nerves, excitement, a little bit of awkwardness, no problem? Or is this something that is absolutely atypical, deserves an urgent referral, and we're going to find you the right person to help you work through these issues?
You touched on this already, but I'm going to give it its own NGL. Is there a role for pornography in a Jewish marriage?
So that one's the easiest question you've asked me all night. The answer is no. There's no role for pornography in a Jewish marriage. There's no realm in which pornography is halakhically permissible. There's no way in which I am going to promote pornography as an industry and from a halachic perspective. I think that when you have an industry that is so morally repugnant, and when you have an art form that is so, for lack of a better word, disgusting and morally corrupt, to promote it in any form is intellectually and morally dishonest. I have seen it among people who call themselves lesson teachers or who call themselves from therapists, who will find room or acceptability for the use of pornography as learning material. They'll counter say, well, it's not an addiction. It's wrong. And when things are really that clearly black and white wrong, there really needs to be a line drawn. Watching two people have intercourse is prohibited on the highest level. We learn from the story of Zimri and Kazvi and Pinchas that it is absolutely morally repugnant and destroys and desecrates something that is meant to be holy, elevated, and spiritual. And in no capacity can I endorse it. Is pornography usage rampant? Yes. Are many people exposed to pornography? Absolutely. Because somebody watched pornography one time or two times, does that mean they're a bad person? Chas v'shalom. There's a very big difference between saying something is okay and saying something happened in the past and it's not okay. And I want to be very clear in my language that pornography usage is never okay. Now that I have a better perspective on what a sexual relationship is meant to be, having seen pornography when I was in high school, I can't really understand how we could encourage that. The objectification of women's bodies is so far removed from what a healthy relationship should be like. The idea that sex in any way is performative is unacceptable. The range in which pornography categories seek to objectify, degrade women, very, very damaging to the soul. And it's very scary because pornography is rampant. It's out there. I know I just mentioned that I have seen pornography. I discovered it by accident in high school. It was shocking to me.
I just don't understand how anyone can, at least coming from a frum space, can recommend something. Whether we're talking about pornography or even any kind of masturbation, male or female, anything that once you're in a union, that is intimate, that is meant to have your desires focused on the other person. Anything that someone's doing, that little nugget in your brain knows, this is really going to take my attention away from focusing that desire, that passion, that enjoyment from my partner, is something that can give us pause. Because even if people can jump through hoops to explain why pornography might be permissible, which
it's not.
I don't think it is, and people should not argue that. Or if people want to say that, they're using it for different reasons. If somebody knows that it's going to pull them away from having that desire and that opportunity for connection directed at their partner, they should think twice, whether it's permissible or otherwise, in my opinion. Because when I hear people try to get permission, it's like, please give me permission to not work on my marriage and to focus on my own pleasure. That's the opposite of what marriage was designed for, in my opinion.
I agree. The only thing I will say is that I would counter with, I do believe there is a role for self-pleasure in certain situations, even within the context of marriage. So for women, I would argue that role can be in discovering pleasure, to bring that and share that with your husband. Men and women do need that. For the halachas are different, and have that permissibility to kind of on your own, without pressure, without feeling embarrassed, in your own privacy, to kind of explore that. I think there's definitely room for encouragement in that. Nida is not only challenging for men. Nida is challenging for many women with strong sexual urges. And when we're weighing the concern between violating issues regarding the harchakos, eventually the doraisa prohibitions of nida, versus female masturbation, which is permissible, if female masturbation is going to remove the accidental slip-ups, it's very important to understand that one is permitted and one is not. When it comes to the male perspective, it's really important to get guidance from a rab. And the reason is because there's prohibitions associated with both, but it's very clear that one is worse than the other. For the prohibition for intercourse with nida is an isur karet. There's really no way around that. It's very easy for somebody to dismiss it and say, well, you should just control yourself. Okay, but if we're in a situation where somebody has that very strong desire, they should seek counsel from a Rav and they should get guidance on it. But to say that there's no role, there's never a purpose, I think it's important to distinguish that there can sometimes be a constructive role in certain contexts, especially for women where it is permitted. For men, when they need to be given guidance on what's appropriate and what's not, it needs to be discussed with the Rav. But I think there's much more room for acceptance, whereas with pornography, I don't see any positive purpose. I would not recommend it to anyone because I think it is fundamentally wrong and damaging, and I don't think there is a positive role for it at all.
Is the use of sex toys encouraged and or permitted?
That is a common question. That is a very, very common question. And I think the really important discussion is that sometimes women are just so curious because things are out there. People are talking about the access for adult toys, vibrators in particular, female pleasure is being
Who's reading the question answers on Instagram from whoever it is that's answering NGLs are going to also be exposed to things such as these additional use items in the intimate space. And therefore, I think it is worth mentioning because suddenly people are like, wait, am I supposed to? Am I not supposed to? What does halacha say?
Especially when it comes to women and their pleasure, there's no express halachic prohibition against their use. And I think in the context of Ona, there can be a positive functional role and room for these additional items. However, and this is my personal opinion, this is my own personal perspective. This is not a psak halacha. This is not I'm not an expert in the field. I'm certainly not a sex therapist. What I have seen and what I do not encourage is for women to abandon experiencing pleasure with their spouse because it's very common for it to take a long time for women to achieve orgasm. It can take as long as 20 to 30 minutes. That's very normal. And the issue is that the use of certain toys like vibrators can speed up that process. And so what sometimes people will do negatively is use these to enhance the marriage at the expense of never developing the skills to enjoy intimacy in its basic form. So the way I explain it to college is not that it's usher, it's not that I don't recommend it, it's not saying you can't explore. And sometimes it might even be necessary, especially if a woman has been trying, maybe there's a good use for it. But I think especially at the beginning, before you jump to the advanced level, focus on the beginner level. Trying something 1 time, 2 times, 10 times is not enough time necessarily for a woman to really develop those skills and experience those things. I think sometimes people are impatient and that's why they jump to we need to add something. Something's missing when in fact the thing that's missing is time and patience and skill development. So is there room for toys? Absolutely. Is it something that I encourage? Not in a broad sense, in a very individual sense. If somebody is really doing the right things and they feel that they could enhance their marriage XYZ, you're not going to get me to discourage it.
I think that if people are asking you anonymously, someone that they don't connect to personally, that no matter what your answer is, if they are asking with a sense of overall shame, the shame will not go away with the permission or not permission that you're seeking if you're still feeling secretive and not reaching out to someone who knows you personally. Because if that's the underlying issue, which is that there's a lot of shame around this and that people want to do something they don't know if they're allowed to, again, you are your own context, and having a Rav or US and halacha, depending on your community, is so pivotal in giving you the freedom that you're seeking.
And I do think what's critical to add to that is that the person that you're asking, there are some times where they can't be too close to you. Many people do not want to call the rebbitzin of their shul and tell them that they're having a difficulty in the bedroom with their husband. It's a very big challenge. Enter the role of a college teacher. Many of the colleges that I work with are from other communities. They definitely don't live near me. They don't have interactions with me outside. And something that I explain to them is that I am not interested remotely in the details of your intimate life. I'm not interested remotely in getting details or hearing about your intimate life. And I actually am very clear about my expectations that the college can have with me when it comes to our discussions surrounding intimacy. I always explain that I'm going to teach you, in theory, and then you're going to have experiences and you are welcome to call me. Or we can have further discussions and you can ask me any questions you have once you have practical questions. But I warn them, I say, I will not call you the day after your wedding. And I will not ask you to share how your wedding night went. Why? That is a very private, intimate experience. You do not owe me any details. However, I want you to know I am here for any questions you have. My expectation is that you will call me. And when you call me, you should be prepared that I will ask you all the questions that I need in order to gain clarity to give appropriate advice, to either get a perspective of, is this normal? Do I need to make a referral? What's going on? I will ask clarifying questions. However, I will not ask any questions outside of what is necessary for me to clarify. And it's important that Kalas understand this. This is not something that I'm interested in on a personal level. This is not juicy gossip for me. I'm here only to provide that support. There's no shame. I'm not judging you. I'm not interested in gaining that information. And what's very important is that as a college teacher, I really have to promote the idea is that what happens in your own personal bedroom is absolutely private. It really is. It's not because there's any shame. It's because it's holy and it's a private thing. When you need advice and you need help, you go to the right people. That's very different than gossiping and chatting with friends about these issues. It's not the same thing. It's going and seeking out a person that can guide and provide insight that is not invested in getting the details of your life. The conversation is really about, okay, how do we navigate this in a functional, practical way? I'm here only to provide help as a resource for you and make the appropriate referrals or give the appropriate guidance. And that's very important. And I think for myself also as a boundary is I will never be sharing my own personal experiences in that realm. I will share experiences that I have learned about. I will share experiences that I have seen. I will share experiences that are common, but in no way, shape, or form does that reflect my own personal experiences. And it's really critical to do that because when you start opening that, almost that gossipy type of sharing, it really takes away something from the idea that this is holy, this is special, this is intimate. And this isn't something that we're just chatting about. This is something that is really meant to be sacred. What I would always say to women is, how would you feel if your husband had this conversation with a group of men? If it would make you very upset and uncomfortable, then it shouldn't be a conversation you are having in a group of women.
Why do you feel it's important to answer these NGLs coming from every corner of the Jewish earth and covering such a wide variety of topics?
It's a good question. So I think that the reality is that putting it out there opens up the conversation. People have these questions and they deserve to have them answered. I actually don't think people should view an anonymous question box on an Instagram page as any form of authoritative answer. I don't think anybody should be looking at me or anybody on Instagram as an authority on anything. I think you can analyze the way that they answer questions and take what they say for the value of what they're saying. Just because somebody says something doesn't make it true. Just because somebody has an opinion doesn't make it a smart opinion. And just because somebody posts something on the internet does not mean it's appropriate to share. But I think part of my goal in kind of opening the conversation is really broadening people's minds. So many women have these questions and do not have a person that they could turn to and have these conversations. And that is something that I think our community could work on. I think women need resources. They don't need more gossip. They don't need more drama. They need resources and they need mentorship, personalized, individualized mentorship. And sometimes that means for myself offering a little bit. Again, I'm young. I don't have that much experience. I have my own mentors. But maybe that itself is the example that I can set, which is that when I have questions, I have people that I can go to and ask. You know what I don't do? Ask not gonna lies. I don't have to ask questions about sexuality to the not gonna lie box. And it's not because I'm an expert in sexuality. It's because I have women in my life who have more experience than me, who I can turn to and say, I'm curious to gain your perspective on this topic. What can you share with me?
I love that you come at it without the shame, with emphasis on the privacy, and share in a very straightforward way. It's something that I think was very necessary, and that's why I think a lot of people are very excited about your NGLs. You're not going to lie. Sure, lots of people have lots of good questions, and sometimes this is the safest and easiest way to share very real concerns. And like you said, give people the context, the language to ask their own questions, and an opportunity to share the importance of having the right people in your life. And if you don't, setting that up for yourself. So
Absolutely.
I do appreciate that. and that we went through all the juiciest bits of NGL, but really just the most real form of what are we doing here? How do we approach this? And what goes through your mind when you're answering people's questions? So thank you.